Ah, you're just in time. Pull up a chair next to the fire. Get yourself comfortable and let me tell you one of the many Legends of Ellaria. Now it's time to conclude our trilogy of Kale and his companions. While Arya went in search of the key, Crassus had his own task to complete. The full moon bathed the marshes in a silver glow, lighting the way for Crassus and the huntsman. Mist crept around their feet and above their heads, catching moonbeams and throwing them back to the sky. The rain had started falling several days ago, softly at first, resembling no more than a mist, and then abruptly escalating into nothing short of torrential. Fortunately, the downpour had subsided to a light sprinkle, making trudging through the wetlands bearable. Being born in the eastern desert, Crassus was having difficulty acclimating. The rain combined with the cold was not something he was used to, and he laboured to keep from feeling miserable. He decided though that the climate change was healthy and would be beneficial in the grand scheme of things. The huntsman hadn't stopped bragging of his escapades since he had joined Crassus, from killing beasts and slaying men by the hundreds to bedding countless women. He wouldn't shut up. He began telling a story about a horned forest beast he'd met last winter.
You told me this one already,
stated Crassus. No, this is a different one.
Stop talking,
replied Crassus. He'd found a huntsman, or so he'd called himself, in the Frog's Nest Inn, the final stop before the marshes spread out into 50 leagues of moss, swamp, ruins and unspeakable monsters. It had occurred to Crassus that he hadn't an inkling of an idea how to traverse the sudden pass through the marshes. The huntsman had been willing enough, though he could not have seen more than 20 summers, judging by the amount of bragging he had done. The coin that Crassus had agreed to pay would have tempted even the most apprehensive of travellers. But since the pair had set out from the Frog's Nest, the huntsman had yammered ceaselessly about his exploits, leaving Crassus sceptical about the credibility of his new companion. After a few steps, the huntsman started again. A fortnight ago, I came upon a dark one. Quite an experience. First of all...
What did I just say?
Crassus interrupted firmly. Crassus slowed the pace. Through the mist, the moon reflected off the moss-infested pools, painting the trees an eerie green. Reflections bounced off the branches and tall grass and played tricks with the shadows. In the distance, Crassus heard the croak of frogs and the quiet music of crickets. He smelled the air, thick with rain and soil and brimstone. Sulphur. A massive shadow moved among the ruins in the distance.
Dark ones,
said Crassus after a pause, keeping his eyes on the ruins up ahead.
What was that you said? You spoke of dark ones. What did you mean?
Crassus asked.
Oh yes, people. People have seen strange creatures, but they dare not speak of them. They call them the Dark Ones, foul beings, each stranger than the other, coming from the place they refer to as Blood Castle. Arag,
Crassus said to himself.
Who?
Asked the huntsman.
Arag, the Red King of the South, the banished king, who invoked the forbidden magic. Blood Castle is another name for the Red Castle.
Oh! The huntsman hesitated.
My uncle, we've met people travelling from that region. They say the darks started appearing more often, and with them, more people disappear more often. They say these creatures are not natural, that they are not from our land, that they are from beyond.
Crassus stopped walking, looked at the huntsman and raised an eyebrow.
Beyond? Where? Just beyond. I'm not really sure,
replied the huntsman. The man finally silent for the first time in their journey. Crassus continued on, slowly, keeping his eyes ahead. Arag had been an ally to Kale's father. When Arag started experimenting in the dark arts and red magic, he corrupted himself, making outlandish claims about the new powers of the black magic and eternal life under the shadow of our master. He became so delusional that Kale's father was forced to shun him, banishing him to the south where he gathered followers and continued his practice of red magic and the dark arts. In the infamous battle of Corniac, Arag introduced his new powers, raising the dead and unleashing them on both Cale's father's army and a collection of the southern clans that had rallied to his cause. Arag won the battle, but his allies turned against him. At the climax of the battle, Cale's father was killed by one of his own, who had been raised as a dark creature by Arag's magic. His death broke his army and scattered it to every corner of the land until Cale reunited them. The rain sputtered out and the fog cleared, opening a clear, crisp sky smeared with stars and illuminated by a silver moon. Crassus inhaled deeply, savouring the freshness that the rain had left, and sending a silent prayer to the gods that it had ended.
Finally!
Exclaimed the huntsman too loudly.
I didn't think it would ever stop. Are those ruins ahead? We should explore. My uncle once discovered...
Shh! Interrupted Crassus with a whisper. He stopped and crouched slowly, unsheathing his broadsword from his back. The huntsman stopped as well and crouched next to Crassus, mirroring him. Crassus's eyes were better than most. He had been watching the ruins keenly as the two had approached him. The shadow he noticed earlier had shifted, and the smell of brimstone grew more potent. The ruins stood 100 steps away. The huntsman squinted, trying to see what his companions were seeing.
What is this?
The huntsman almost shouted. Crassus silenced him with a quick gesture. 4 fiery eyes snapped open as a shadow clawed its way to the top of a high ruined wall and spread its 2 massive foreclaws. The thing uttered a booming noise that sounded half growl, half gurgle, startling them both.
What in the name of the gods is that?
The huntsman asked. His voice quivered despite himself. With trembling hands he strung his bow. Crassus ignored the question and instead said,
We'll need to bait it. Good idea,
said the huntsman. He didn't have an inkling of an idea what the warrior was talking about, but he wasn't about to argue the strategy in the face of such a monstrous creature. He nocked an arrow and was waiting for Crassus's command when realization struck him.
Wait, what?
He said. The huntsman found himself alone in the middle of the field, gaping at the giant thing, crawling towards him on legs as big as tree trunks. Bow strung and arrow nooked. He froze, petrified. The beast's 4 pointed legs slammed into the ground as a shadow lumbered forward, the moon revealing a giant crab with a tail and stinger in the likeness of a scorpion that shot fire from its mouth. A creature that looked as if the dark gods beyond had grown tired of creating conventional monsters.
God save me!
The huntsman muttered, breathless. The following moment allowed him to muster enough courage to fire his arrow. The iron tip pinged off the creature's shell with a spark and was lost in the darkness of the marsh. As he reached for another arrow, his quiver strap snapped and fell from his back. With shaking hands he bent and took another shaft from the pile on the ground. He drew and loosed without bothering to aim, feathering the creature's soft underbelly. The creature reared on its hind legs, shrieking in pain. The huntsman found his own legs and turned from the monster, barreling in the opposite direction. The creature lashed its head and spat long streams of fire as it tried to wrench the new attacker from its back. Crassus held onto the hilts of his broadswords that he'd buried into the shell of the massive crab creature. His legs flailed beneath him as he scrambled to find purchase on the crab's slick shell. Crassus pulled one of his swords free from the shell. A dark steaming ooze sprung from the wound as the crab creature howled again. Droplets fell from Crassus's sword and sent a burning pain through his arm, as if he had been splashed by water from a boiling cauldron. The burn seared his skin and forced him to loosen his grip. As he did, the creature bucked and sent him over the top of its head to land in a puddle of mud and moss with a sickening thud. The creature gurgled and spat a stream of liquid fire at the annoyance that had come from its back. The molten fluid spread over patches of marshland, hardening in some areas and creating thick clouds of steam where the water was deep. The thing lumbered forward, ready to feast on its freshly charred kill, but as the steam cleared, it saw nothing but burnt ground.
"Oh no, lot!"
challenged Crassus from the top of a ruined column. The steam had been thick enough to evade the crab creature's stampede, so Crassus used it to gain a higher vantage point. He needed to retrieve the sword that was still stuck in the thing's shell. The Aunalot turned its head and fixed its 4 fiery eyes on its prey. It reared its hind quarters and lashed at the wall with its massive scorpion-like tail. Crassus sidestepped and slashed, opening a gash in the Aunalot's tail that oozed blue venom. It drew closer to the column that Crassus had perched upon. Crassus readied himself. The tail lashed at him once more. Crassus leapt and brought his sword in a downward cut with both hands, severing the stinger from the end of its tail and raining down gobs of thick blue venom on the crab's back. The venom didn't burn like the Aunalot's blood. But it slickened his back like oil on marble. Crassus landed on his feet, which almost immediately slipped from beneath him, slamming his face into the Aunalot's shell. Stars flashed before his eyes, and he heard a crunch as his nose broke. For a second, he lay unmoving on the shell as gobs of venom continued to fall. He started to slide off the creature's back when he spied his blade, still buried to the hilt. He reached out before he could slide off and grasped the hilt as the Aunalot shrieked and bucked in pain. With both swords in hand, warm blood dripping from his nose and slick blue venom covering his body, Crassus gathered himself to his knees and bore his other blade into the shell, steadily making his way towards the beast's head. Skewer by skewer, Crassus finally found himself at the neck. Grasping one hilt, he lifted the point of his blade above his head, intent on plunging it into the Aunalot's brain. With the strength he had left, he brought the point of his sword straight down. The shock of the blow felt as if he had tried to pierce the steel wall of one of Kael's siege towers, shooting a brutal vibration through his arm, loosening his grip and sending his blade clanging over the side of the shell. The beast bucked again in pain and irritation, and Crassus caught a glimpse of his dropped sword as it stuck in the ground. The Aunalot's battered scorpion tail shot down at Crassus as if in an attempt to swat him off. Crassus endured some of the attempts, but the swats weakened as the beast persisted. At last Crassus wrenched his second blade free of the beast's back in one fluid motion, leapt, turned in the air and slashed as he dropped in front of the Aunalot's face. His blade struck home, opening up 2 of the thing's 4 eyes on his way to the ground. Crassus's feet hit the forgiven marshland and he rolled. The Aunalot shook its head and roared in agony as smouldering gobs of black blood fell to the ground. Crassus seized his opportunity and sheared through the leg closest to him, spouting more of the seething black liquid and tilting the beast to one side. To avoid being crushed, Crassus rolled to the right and with a swift hack made short work of the other leg. In a final roar of anguish, the Aunalot fell forward to the ground. The tortured beast opened its mouth in a final effort. The awful gurgling sound filled Crassus's ears and he felt heat wash over his face. Determined to die fighting, he raised his sword and aimed it at the 2 eyes he had not already opened up. He charged the beast with a fierce battle cry. An arrow pierced the mist, flying over Crassus's elbow, and lost itself in the chasm of the Aunalot's fiery throat. The thing made a choking sound and then gurgled painfully. Crassus ceased his charge and threw himself to the side as the remaining 2 eyes exploded outwards. Its head bounced and roiled like an egg in boiling water. Steam poured from under its shell and from the openings in its head that might have been referred to as ears. It finally came to rest with a sigh that Crassus thought sounded something like relief. Crassus looked to his back and saw the huntsman. His eyes were closed, his hands were shaking, and his bowstring was still vibrating. Crassus walked over to him, wiping his face of blood and blue venom, and sheathing his sword. He clasped the boy's shoulders whose squinted eyes opened. They immediately widened as he realised how close he was to the thing he had just killed.
Easy,
assured Crassus.
the Aunalot is slain. You've done well.
The boy looked wide-eyed from Crassus to the massive steaming beast and shook his head. I ran. I did not know what to do, so I watched," he mumbled as he got to his feet. "I'm not really a huntsman. My name is Willem. I took this bow from..." Crassus stopped him with a wave of his hand, then thought.
"You were watching the entire time?"
he inquired, more intrigued than irritated. "Aye. Forgive me," Willem replied honestly. Crassus considered this, then asked,
"From where?"
The huntsman pointed to a cluster of rocks that had been not 13 paces from where the dead Arnolot lay. "Ha!" Crassus exclaimed and clapped the huntsman on the back, almost sending him sprawling. He then made his way over to the massive beast, smelling and examining.
"You must have pierced the fire sack,"
said Crassus finally.
"It cooked from the inside."
"My eyes were closed," replied the huntsman wearily. Hiding from the battle, muscles tensed and eyes shut, had drained him. He felt a stab of regret. Most of that energy could have been used fighting instead of cowering. Crassus raised his brow and suppressed a chuckle in his chest. If the boy could remain undetected and make a shot like that with his eyes closed, he may yet have potential. He needed training, but that would be easy if he was willing. Crassus once more regarded the roasting head and body of the giant crab. It looked identical to the crabs that had filled his nets before he became a part of Kale's personal guard. He took a deep breath through his nose and no longer smelt brimstone and ash. Instead, he was reminded of the sea and the markets of his hometown on the west coast. Life was simpler then. His native people, his family. But that was a lifetime ago, before the world had turned to dust. Willem interrupted his musing. "What was that name you called it?"
Arnolot. In my native tongue it means fat crab, more or less. It was my favorite dish.
He noticed the moon glint from a piece of metal stuck in the mud. He walked over and pulled the other sword from the ground. He eyed the great creature that had tried to make a meal of him. A grin spread on his face. With a proper washing and care, they could have rations to last them through the end of the year. Crassus doubted their journey would take that long.
Suddenly I'm hungry. Come now, my friend, the Arnolot Slayer. We'll camp here and I'll tell you of the Western Sea. Tomorrow we continue, but for now we feast.
He wiped his blade of mud and pond water, then prepared to shuck the greatest crab he'd ever seen. Willem the huntsman slung his bow as he followed his companion. He felt a chill in the air, but this time he welcomed it. With steady hands he unsheathed his hunting knife and went to work. Well, that's the end of tonight's tale. Should you wander back this way sometime, be sure to stop in for another Legend of Ellaria. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, maybe consider hitting the subscribe button there on the right, or checking out some other videos here on the left, or perhaps you might even share with some friends.